Alrighty, folks, this is another home recording bedroom quickie, and I'm actually making this response to my last video because I got some feedback on the topic of recording electric guitar with two microphones, and I made some outrageous claims in this video. I'm saying microphones aren't important, where you put it in relation to the speaker cone's not important, but for some reason the thing that people got most stuck on was what I said about the 3-to-1 rule. And I think this is really interesting because the 3-to-1 rule is a topic that gets everyone in a frenzy on the internet, of course, just like everything else. So I was hoping to bring some clarity in this video of what the hell the 3-to-1 rule is and how exactly we should be utilizing it in our recording studio. Okay, let's start. And I also should mention that I may be making some jokes and calling people idiots. I don't actually think that. I actively encouraged pushback in said video, so don't take anything to heart if I start calling people idiots. It is just for comedic effect. Alright, so the first thing we need to do is talk about phase cancellation and what exactly phase cancellation is. And throughout this video, I will be using some sourced information from the Recording Studio Handbook by John M. Warham. And this is my personal Bible for home recording basics, and I encourage everybody to listen it. And I want to make this clear that I'm not just pulling this information out of my ass, because I know I'm already going to have people disagreeing with me. And my information is sourced from an actual book and not just some random forum on Gearsluts, or should I say Gearspace, okay? So let's just keep that in mind. I'm going to read the definition of phase cancellation directly from here. The attenuation that occurs when two waveforms of equal frequency and opposite polarity are combined. The attenuation may be total when the waveforms are also of equal amplitude. Okay, so those are some fancy words. I think it's better if we draw this out so we can better visualize what the hell that says. And you know, it's about to get serious when I bring out the whiteboard. So let's think of a system where we have a 60 hertz sine wave. And this could be any type of system. This could be an electrical signal system. This could be a spring system. This could be a multitude of things. And let's say in this system, we introduce another sine wave completely out of phase, 180 degrees out of phase. And I'm going to attempt not to get too technical in this detail because my nerdy engineering brain can go a little overboard. Let's say in this system, these signals were to be summed together. Because they are completely 100 degrees out of phase, they are going to cancel each other out and result in a signal of 0. Now, let's just say, for example, the amplitude of this second wave is smaller than this first wave, right? So it's the same frequency, but let's just stick to audio here. Same frequency, but smaller amplitude. When these are going to add together, you're really just subtracting the amplitude of this wave to this wave. So you're going to get something that looks like this, but with a smaller amplitude. Alright, is that clear? Hopefully I made that clear. Now, in reality, when you're dealing with microphones and recording in the room, you're not really recording sine waves, you're recording air particles in the air. That looks something like this. I'm not even going to attempt to draw this out because that's going to be too hard, right? So you're not actually looking at a sine wave, you're looking at compressions and retractions of air particles in the air, right? That is how humans hear, or animals in general hear. For the sake of this video, we're just going to stick to the mathematical representation of a signal wave just for ease of drawing it out. Now, obviously, the situation I just described is an extremely simple form of how waveforms will combine with each other. In the real world, sound signals are nothing like a regular sine wave, right? It's going to look something like that, all over the place, right? And the second microphone that you're going to be summing with this signal is going to look something like this, right? It's something crazy. It's really complex. The mathematics to try to describe something like this is also really complex. So, you know, just keep that in mind that these things are really complicated, and this sort of visual aid is merely just to help you understand the basics. Because once you understand the basics, you can apply it to your studio without much thought. And a really important factor to remember during all of this when recording in a room with two microphones is that you're never 100% able to fully eliminate phase cancellations. There are always going to be some present. The best we can do is minimize those cancellations as much as possible. And if you're careful, you will reduce them to such an amount that you're virtually eliminating any issues to the end user listening to the signals. This is where the 3-2-1 rule comes in. It is merely an attempt to minimize these phase cancellations. And as I mentioned before, there is a ton of confusion and argument online about how this rule is applied, the actual math that goes behind it, and its actual usefulness in the recording studio. And I think a big part of the confusion lies in the fact that there are two situations that people tend to describe with the 3-to-1 rule. The first situation is when you have two microphones recording one sound source, and the second situation is when you have two microphones recording multiple sound sources. I am going to explain later why this distinction between the two situations is important, but for now, let's stick to the first situation where we're using two microphones to record one single sound source. This is the situation that I described in my last video, where I had two microphones on one single guitar cabinet or guitar cabinet speaker. Now, I am going to describe the situation that is outlined in this book verbatim, and I want to go through the simple math that it shows to demonstrate why phase cancellation happens with two microphones. So, as I said, we're looking at the first situation which the book describes, where we're recording a single sound source. And these are the two microphones. Now, the distance between these two microphones is crucial in determining what frequencies are going to see the most cancellation. I must make one slight clarification here. It's not actually the distance between the two microphones. It is the difference in path length from each microphone to the sound source. That being said, the situation I'm drawing out on the whiteboard is still accurate to the model. I merely simplified the model by putting the microphones in line with one another to help visualize better why phase cancellation happens. Now, the book describes a situation where the distance that these microphones, which in the book it describes as 3 inches, is half the wavelength of the problem frequency. Now, why does it specifically describe 3 inches as half the waveform frequency? Let's draw it out to explain why. Okay, so I tried my best to draw this out where half of the wavelength in this situation is 3 inches, the exact distance these microphones are away from each other. Now, if you see, the point at which microphone 1 is going to be hearing that signal is at the low point of the sine wave. And the point at which microphone 2 at that same exact moment is hearing the signal is going to be at the height of the sine wave. This is essentially the situation I first described when I was drawing out phase cancellation, where you have two sine waves in complete opposite polarity from each other. You are going to get a complete cancellation with this wavelength of sound. Now, let's do the math quickly that the book describes. Okay, so we have the problem frequency in question equaling the speed of sound over the wavelength. So that is going to be roughly 1100. Oh my god, this is hard to do. 1100 feet per second divided by the wavelength, which is double the distance between these microphones. So that would be a half a foot. Sorry for you metric nerds. So that's 1100 feet per second divided by a half a foot per cycle. That is going to equal 2200 cycles per second, or in other words, hertz. Now, in actuality, once again, this is a really simplified way of looking at the issue. There are going to be harmonic frequencies that are also affected. Let me draw that out quickly. Right, so here you could see a frequency signal with a higher frequency than the first, and we're going to see the same situation where the top of this waveform is being heard by the second microphone, while the bottom of the same waveform is being heard by the first microphone. So there's going to be multiple frequencies that are seeing this attenuation, and this is what we call comb filtering. Now, the book describes, in order to eliminate as many issues as possible, to follow the general rule of thumb for the 3-to-1 rule. That is, the second microphone should be 3 times the amount of distance from the first microphone that the first microphone is from the sound source. So if this distance here between the sound source and the first microphone is dimension x, that means the second microphone should be 3 times x in a radius from this first microphone. And specifically, the book gives the situation where you have a 1 foot distance and the second microphone has a 3 foot difference. Now, that should sound pretty similar, right? Because that is the same exact situation I described in my last video. Your second microphone should be at least 3 times the amount of distance your first microphone is from your source. So a 3-to-1 ratio. So let's just say, for simplicity's sake, this microphone was a foot away from the guitar amp. That means you want this microphone to be a little more than 3 feet. Maybe 4 feet would be fine, right? As long as you're somewhere around there, you're going to avoid a lot of phasing issues between these two microphones. The 3-to-1 rule, really important to remember. Albeit with a lot less finesse than the book does, because I was speaking off the cuff, and with a slight distinction that I had a slip of the tongue, and I said that the 3 times distance should be from the sound source to the second microphone. I should have said from the second microphone to the first microphone. That should be the 3 times the distance. So all you goddamn knuckleheads out there telling me I'm telling people the 3-to-1 rule in a wrong way, I don't know what to tell you. The book itself, John M. Warham's telling me that's what it is. As I mentioned, there is some source of confusion about this, because if you look online, you'll see a bunch of jabronis trashing my man John M. Warham. And we're not going to get too nitty-picky into the details why, but remember how I described that there are 2 situations where this rule is often applied to? Let's look at that situation now. Now, this is the situation where most people say that the 3-to-1 rule should only apply to, where you have 2 microphones recording multiple sources. They say that the distance from microphone 1 to its source, let's label this X, that the distance between the second microphone should be 3 times this amount. Very similar situations. Now, the reason I am making this distinction important is because the reason that people say this general rule of thumb works in this situation is not because of wavelength differences, but because of decibel level reasons. The second microphone is going to be hearing the first sound source at a much lower volume than microphone 1. And that is crucial, very, very crucial. Do you understand that? That it's because the bleed from the first sound source in the second microphone is insufficient enough to affect the first microphone's signal choice. If you remember when I first described phase cancellation, I gave the situation where that second sine wave has a smaller amplitude and thus doesn't attenuate the frequency fully. That is essentially what this situation is describing. It all has to do with decibel levels. Now, because of this distinction, people are trashing my man John M. Warham all over the internet, saying that his method is not applicable to real world. The math doesn't make sense. And I must admit, the way the text is written, it seems to imply that the reason the 3-to-1 rule works is because of the distance, the physical distance between the 2 microphones. It's because he gives that equation. But it doesn't actually say that. It implies it. Right? It just says use the 3-to-1 rule. It doesn't say why it works. And that is important. The situation that he describes with the one single sound source and the 2 microphones It's working on the same principle of decibel level differences. It is not because of changing the distance between the two microphones. Now, it seems to me that is why there is so much confusion. People are assuming that this 3-to-1 rule works because of this distance. Now, if you do the math based upon the equation that my man John M. Warham gives, you will see that no matter what distance you put these microphones away from each other, there's always going to be that problem frequency. It's just a matter of simple math. There's always going to be distances that affect audible frequencies. The important thing is the decibel level. The decibel level between the microphones. That is what is important. As I mentioned, you're never going to be able to fully eliminate phase cancellation. You could only minimize it. And that is what the 3-to-1 rule is meant to do. Now, once again, I may be wrong here, but that is the way I am interpreting the text. And John M. Warham is not the first guy to come up with this interpretation of the 3-to-1 rule. He is simply regurgitating this information from earlier texts. I'm not going to get into the extreme history of why this rule was developed, because this video is probably already way too long and longer than I anticipated, okay? So we're not going to get into the details. I know I'm going to have people in the comments telling me, I missed this, I missed that. But something that we all need to understand is that this is a general rule of thumb. Your ears should always be the full deciding factor. And I mentioned this in the video with the text. I say, don't fully rely on this. You need to use your ears to listen for any phase cancellations, right? When I use this 3-to-1 rule in the studio, I'm not getting out a ruler and saying, okay, this microphone is 2.75 inches. I need to, with my calculator, 2.75 times 3, and I put that microphone by that distance. I'm not doing that. I'm merely just looking at my eyes and approximating roughly. And then I will listen back with my headphones in the monitoring and say, does that sound good? Does something sound off? And then I will adjust from there. I adjust all the time. It is by no means a full solution. It is only a general rule of thumb, right? That is really important, and I should emphasize that as much as possible. Now, a second thing that I must mention to get all you blowhards off my ass is that at the end of the day, it's what you hear that matters, right? Towards the end of my last video, I give examples of me utilizing the 2 microphones on 1 sound source situation, right? And to me, I like those guitar sounds. I've had people comment on that very video saying, wow, I like these guitar sounds, right? If I was in a recording studio and I set up those microphones, and some goddamn nerd in the control room came out and said, Mario, you know, those microphones really shouldn't be placed like that. You know, you're getting some phase cancellations. You know, you have to move the microphones. I'd say, no, you don't. It sounds great. I love the sound on Little Yellow Bird. Maybe if you analyzed that guitar track, there would be phase cancellation and comb filtering. I don't care. It sounds good to me, right? That's all that matters. It sounds good. You don't need to get out an oscilloscope, like someone mentioned in the comments, to determine whether or not your microphones are in phase. This is ridiculous. You don't need to do it. Does it sound good? That is the full deciding factor, right? Something like recording the drums, you are going to get phase cancellations no matter what you do when you have a multiple mic setup. It's impossible to get rid of them. At the end of the day, it is what sounds good in your ears. And these 3-to-1 rule is just a general rule of thumb, okay? Is that clear? Can you stop riding my ass? All right? Now, all kidding aside, I am joking. I'm not actually mad at people. I think it's good when people question things I say, or anyone, right? Anyone in your life questions you. You need to get humbled. You need to question your methodologies, right? As an engineer, which my day job is, I'm a mechanical engineer, right? All the time, as engineers, you were questioned by fellow engineers. Why are you doing it this way? Shouldn't you be doing this way? And at first, you might be standoffish. You go, no, the way I'm doing it is good. But then you go, okay, let me look at it. And you might get a new perspective. You might change the way you were modeling something or design something. This is important to get that feedback, right? So, of course, I'm not actually mad at anyone for giving me pushback. I actively encouraged it in that video. Now, there are probably some things I missed in this video about the 3-to-1 rule, okay? I know I'm going to get comments telling me I missed a ton of stuff. All right, I understand that. Let's have a reasonable discussion in the comments below of why you think I'm wrong and why the 3-to-1 rule doesn't apply to a single source. For example, I had one commenter, I'm gonna have to look it up, but he said that the 3-to-1 rule does not work in a situation where the microphones are in line with the sound source, and I don't see why. If you could give me a reason why, then I may agree with you. I may say, okay, you know what, you're right. There is issues. But to me, there's no reason why, okay? So that's what I'm saying. Don't just tell me I'm wrong. Tell me why I'm wrong. Show me the math. Show me the applicability. Show me something of why what the fuck I'm saying is wrong, right? So inclusion, I'm an idiot. Don't take anything I say for gospel. Always question what I say. And for most of the time, the 3-to-1 rule is going to do you fine. But you must listen with your ears. It's as simple as that. There is no band-aid that fixes phase cancellation. You need to listen to your ears and adjust from there, okay? For everyone saying I'm misinforming people about the 3-to-1 rule, I respectfully disagree. I think the situation I described in that video is applicable, and the proof is in the pudding, okay? Hopefully I made some sense here and I wasn't all over the place. I really tried to be informational in this video. And once again, I'm not actually mad at people. Pushback is good. Alright, I'm going to end this video. Hopefully you learned something. Waveforms, case cancellation, 3-to-1, whatever. Alright, see you later. Good night. Bye. Okay? Alright, see ya. Bye.